we've seen this a lot with customers that have deployed massive amounts of VMs inside the cloud, and then they realize their costs are soaring. But just imagine the predictive analytics that you could do in the AI and machine learning to recommend how a customer can actually reduce and optimize their costs. If you do that well enough, then you can actually use machine learning to your advantage down the road to get, almost orders of magnitude efficiency over the long term.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of Looking Ahead. Today I have a very special guest and a friend, Taimur. Hi Taimur, good to have you here with us today.
Hey Mohammed, good to be here.
Thank you. So I'm going to discuss today with Taimur some of the challenges with the current tools and how AI can be an opportunity for us to reinvent how we do software development and operations in the cloud. So Taimur is a senior technology executive with more than 15 years experience. Taimur is currently leading worldwide customer success for Microsoft Azure Data Platform Analytics and Artificial Intelligence business. Prior to Microsoft, Taimur served as managing director for Amazon Web Services, or AWS, when the business reached more than $25 billion in ARR. Taimur grew in 3 countries, lived in 5 states. He lives right now in Kirkland, just a few miles from where I live right now, where he lives with his wife and 3 boys. He strives to live an active lifestyle and enjoys cross-training, hiking, biking, and long walks. And we had a lot of these together, Taimur. And he's an avid reader in technology, business, history. He enjoys arts, music, coffee, and most importantly, cooking during the weekends for his family. But what about your friends, man?
Yeah,
you should have us. You should have us one day and give us one of your specialties.
Yeah, friends are family as well too, right? So.
Cool. All right. Well, welcome, Taimur, and happy again to have you here with us. So let's start with the status quo. Let's talk about the state of the cloud infrastructure right now. Where do you see the problems, the bottlenecks that engineers and companies are facing these days? In either the development side, at the beginning of the cycle, the software development cycles, or maybe at the end, which is how I manage my application, monitor it, and make sure that it's reliable enough and efficient running on cloud infrastructure. What is your take on that? Where are we right now? End to end from your perspective.
Yeah. That's a good question, and I think the best way to sort of answer that is where we are is largely dependent on where the customer is starting their journey, right? And so, and I'll give sort of a few examples of that just to kind of characterize it. Several customers today have a lot of their infrastructure, their applications running on premise, right? And, for many, the journey is much about, how can I move to the cloud to get cost savings and just access to a much more scalable and secure and reliable platform underneath, right? And, typically those ones are very lift and shift migrations. And what typically happens after that is once a customer has moved over to the cloud, that's just day one for their overall journey, right? Once they're in the cloud, they have to think about a variety of different things, which is, the cloud operating model, right? Now that they're in this environment where they can get easy access to virtual machines via APIs, they really have to think about, provisioning differently, security differently. And when you think about that, that's just operating the underlying, infrastructure in the cloud. How does that really tie in then with how they're developing software, right? And so if you think about now, there's a rapid pace of software development that can be achieved now because very quickly you can, push code over to a virtual environment and, stage it and move it into production much faster. And one of the challenges that I see typically that customers have is after they've moved over to the cloud, it is sort of adjusting that overall software development process using the new tool sets. Some of them might have been a waterfall development approach, and so now they're thinking about DevOps and things like continuous integration, continuous deployment, using a variety of tools so they can get much better collaboration across distributed teams. But for the most part, being able to leverage the cloud native capabilities while having to sort of adjust how they develop software and services.
Got it. So things are moving faster. That's definitely the name of the game right now. Move everything faster, develop code faster, and so on. In terms of, and now developers and DevOps have more to do every day. Do you think that we're now having more and more complexities in our systems, how we write code, how we monitor it, and how we manage that whole life cycle? And do you think that this would have an impact over the medium and long range, or do you think that some of those problems are being solved naturally with that new model? What is your take on that?
To some extent, some of the problems are being solved with the new model, because just by moving to the new model, you inherit some of the capabilities that give what I like to call, developer productivity and efficiency, right?
Mhm.
But having said that, though, where you have productivity from a developer standpoint and simplicity, you also have a lot more choices, right? And so you have a variety of different tool chains that you can use. You have a different set of underlying technology that you can deploy that to, right? And so if you think about the proliferation of developer focused tools and frameworks, whether you're using container based frameworks, it could be managed services that Microsoft offers through the Azure platform, or AWS offers through their platform. There's a lot more choice, which adds the complexity to the overall process. Choice is great, but at the same time, you don't want to have decision fatigue as well too. And decision fatigue is something that you know was a bit of a problem in the old model. It just takes a very different form in the new model, because you have a proliferation of programming languages and ways to deploy it and technologies to use.
So that's definitely an interesting angle. So definitely, the complexity of making a decision about the tool and about the framework is there. And actually, one of the things, you remember, you and I were chatting at a certain point. How many VMs do I need to go through and select from event VM types and sizes in AWS or Azure or any even cloud provider? There are in tens, if not hundreds, maybe right now, if you consider different generations. That's definitely adds more and more kind of a burden on the developers and DevOps guys. If we take one step back in all of that, and even just think about the dynamics, the interaction dynamics between developers and DevOps. Do you see any impact as well of that complexity on their interactions? Is it getting better, smoother? Um, do we need a different kind of an interaction model between the developers and DevOps and other roles, maybe technical roles in the org?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would go back to the thing of like what DevOps as a methodology helped solve was kind of break the silo between development and operations, right? And so if you sort of look at it from a methodology standpoint, the fact that they were originally siloed in the older model uh, introduced much more inefficiencies downstream, right? Where people that develop the code and then ship it over to ops folks, the disconnect in certain aspects of that whole process would delay rollout and slow things down, right? So DevOps as a methodology is great in that it sort of combines the effort, right? But at the same time, now you have tools that facilitate that, right? Because at the end of the day, when you look at where are the bottlenecks and the long poles in the overall process, it's typically in things that need to get done where automation can help streamline and reduce the cycle time from developing code and moving into production. But then at the same time, there's also an opportunity now where the number of data points that you collect throughout the software development process are, number one, being captured, and number two, if you can get smart about automation, you certainly give productivity and efficiency back to the overall process. But imagine if you could also be in a situation where now you can use those data points as an asset to be able to actually be more predictive in what you can do, right? And in what you can avoid, right?
Mhm.
And so there's several examples of that that are starting to take shape in the overall software development process, where now that you're getting these data points, you have a rich set of data that you can now actually apply machine learning and artificial intelligence to get more efficiencies from a tooling perspective.
Nice. So can you give us one or two examples of that? What are the top maybe 1 to 2 areas that you think that we can apply AI, that we have enough data, some repeating patterns, and we can maybe apply AI to improve those areas?
Yeah. So while, one could take a look at the end-to-end spectrum of software development and say, what are those decision points that typically developers go through where there's a high human judgment, right? Or there's a high opportunity for automation, just given the fact that there's, a laborious set of work that a developer has to go through. You know, some of the three areas that I'm particularly interested in, and I see a lot of opportunity. Number one, when you look at the overall streamlining of software development pipelines as well as data pipelines to a streamlined set of activity that eventually takes something into production, there's clearly a lot of opportunity for automation there, but then actually some predictive work that can be done to course correct things along the way. And what I typically see is in my space in particular is the opportunity for AI to be applied to data engineering, where you have to take multiple data sources, wrangle the data together, do various transformations and get it into a format where a data scientist can actually go and create some models out of that. Between that beginning state and the end state, there's opportunity for automation. There's opportunity to be able to catch certain things much earlier before they become hard to reverse downstream, right?
Mhm.
So you can naturally imagine a situation where you spent all this time and energy kind of data engineering multiple data sources into a data lake, for example. But if it just so happens that the data lake has the wrong format or the wrong transformation, you're having to redo that process again, right? And so imagine a situation where you can actually have some predictive capability to see that, hey, a format is off, right? A numeric versus an integer, for example. That has a huge impact on, analysis of revenue data, for example. And so being able to catch those things earlier allow you to course correct them before they can actually, be as part of the model, for example. So that's
That's
certainly one
a
area.
Yeah, that's a very interesting angle because usually when I think about software development or software lifecycle, I only think about code and code moving from one stage to another until it's running. But the data that now is being processed by the code, that if we need to do some cleansing and do some kind of proper formatting and transformation for this data, that's a part that's definitely expensive as well, or that contributes to the complexity of any software life cycle if you're crunching large amounts of data.
If you're, yeah, exactly. But then I'd even say, going back to your example too, like when you actually look at code, I mean, predictive capabilities where ML and AI can be applied is like with bug fixes, right? And so, being able to have models that can, kind of detect, hey, are you creating a bug, right? Or are you creating something that might not have as much performance efficiency for how you're utilizing memory or any other actual hardware specific resource, right? And so in journalism, they're using linguistic AI to basically advise people that are authoring documents or anything like that for how they need to adjust their tone, largely based on looking at the linguistic structure of content, right? And very similarly, when you look at software development, you can have kind of the code AI where you're actually looking to say, hey, this is not the right way to do a for loop, or not the right way to leverage, memory resources. And so there is an aspect of how AI can help prevent bugs, but at the same time, AI can also be used in code generation, right? And so if you are kind of creating code that's going to have a unique hardware dependency, you could actually generate code to meet that hardware dependency or that particular firmware or whatever device you're kind of building something to, particularly with IoT use cases. That's where AI can really help in code generation.
Got it. Now I know that we have a big spectrum of software developers. There are software developers who write for embedded systems, for mobile apps, for cloud infrastructure, or cloud-based applications. Now, since you and I, have been working on cloud-based apps and cloud infrastructure, let's just maybe you and I were the head of, software developers writing apps for that would run somewhere in the cloud. And let's say that someone give us a magic wand, and that magic wand can basically tell us, hey, make a wish about the tool, right? That would help you and make you most productive, that would make your day, right? What would be that? What would be the change in one of those tools that you would like to make with that magic wand?
That's a great question. You know what? I mean, I look at when you look at the software development process, I always look at those areas where there's either a large amount of laborious work that needs to be done. There's certainly long poles in that the time that it takes is significant. And it comes in the way of what I like to call developer creativity, right?
Mhm.
At the end of the day, you want to spend as much time creating code that has IP and uniqueness and differentiation, right? And so when you look at those areas that are the most challenging, it is in how you manage your code pipelines, right? And there's been a lot of progress there with tools that AWS has introduced, Microsoft has introduced, and a lot of these kind of pure developer startup companies in the pipeline automation that they've been able to do. But then the other area is actually, how do you take code and all that you've built and really operationalize it into production, right?
Mhm.
And while there's a lot of kind of DevOps focus and tools that are there, you look at this emerging area of machine learning and AI and this whole category of ML. That's a huge area where right now developers are having a lot of pain with that, right? And so how do you sort of operationalize and productionize a machine learning model? If I'm a data scientist and you give me a magic wand, I would say help me automate and solve the whole ML ops difficulty, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you see
Now,
that.
let's make a kind of a flashback. So let's say you're one of the pioneers in the cloud infrastructure. You started early on with AWS, 2008. It was just something new. Um, so can you share a story, just a story that would be considered right now a funny story about the customer acceptance of that technology? How was it in that early days when you tried to sell that technology to users or customers?
Uh, you know, I think there was a variety of them, right? I mean, when you look at sort of various companies had different starting points, right? And so we worked with a lot of the social gaming companies that were very willing to kind of roll up their sleeves and kind of use the technology. But the interesting thing with it is when you look at some of the early adopters of cloud, a lot of the scaffolding capabilities were not there, right? Or were not provided sort of out of the box, right? you had all these various APIs and command line tools that people would use to kind of basically, configure and deploy and then manage their systems, right? All the way from, kind of development, configuration, monitoring, and, kind of um, ongoing maintenance that they had to do, right? And so what we saw a lot of customers do is actually fill in those gaps with their own tools, right?
Mhm.
And you can see a lot of companies, Netflix in particular, that built various components, which eventually that they open sourced, which addressed some of those early gaps in the overall platform, right? Which eventually over time, there was enough sort of reason for AWS to go build that, right? And so you saw a lot of those scaffolding capabilities being part of the native platform. And so that was a very interesting journey to see that customers doing that, right? And as kind of the maturity of cloud kind of developed, going from basic infrastructure gaps that would filter on to platform as a service specific gaps, and then data specific ones too, right? Because now when you sort of have to manage data pipelines coming from relational systems, non-relational systems, in systems, that scaffolding was needed.
Got it. Cool. So let's jump to now the human aspect of the technology and also how AI maybe can improve some of those dynamics and the interactions between different team members. So you mentioned at the beginning that now developers need to be closer to the day-to-day operations with infrastructure. And the promise of the DevOps model is to basically bring different functions within the team closer so that they move faster. Now, sometimes you may find those teams as they try to move faster with those technologies, and again, with some possible gaps in their knowledge and experiences, some friction may take place. And I'm not sure if this is something that you might have experienced yourself or so with some of your customers. Now, how do you think, uh, you know, adding AI or using AI would maybe reduce that friction or maybe make more teams more productive in general? We've been talking about the single engineer and how the AI can complement the single engineer, but when we, take it at a more kind of a macro level, do you have any thoughts around this area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think some of the areas that I mentioned where there's high level of either human judgment or the need for automation where AI can be applied to improve productivity overall, right? And so in many ways, I think when you look at certain capabilities like pipeline management, um, those are attempts at bringing automation to the overall process, right?
Mhm.
But in those steps, there's, like I said, a rich amount of data that's collected, and machine learning models can be built based on that, right? As you sort of kind of train the data to be able to look for certain anomalies or certain patterns in the way software development is done, to be able to kind of catch that and course correct that. Very much like you can kind of see, like I said, linguistic AI, or even in many IDEs right now, is sort of predictive corrections around as you're developing the code. I think the areas of opportunity within the cloud in particular are going to be in continuous integration, continuous deployment, at the same time being able to take these niche areas as well too, such as IoT and machine learning, that are a little more nascent in their journey right now, but the opportunity to build the right scaffolding, end-to-end automation with machine learning models to help sort of predict certain behavior, or catch certain things in advance,
Mhm.
with moving these apps into production. And the examples, like I see when some of our customers are building capabilities that they need to push to an edge device, if you roll out something in the edge device and then eventually there's something wrong with it, like that's change management that you have to factor in. Either you roll back those changes or you have to do patches or whatever it may be. But imagine if you could kind of predict that in advance before something gets rolled to an edge device. It's huge value that you can save, customer satisfaction that you can drive and improve. And so that's where the AI opportunity, I think, exists, is in some of those emerging areas.
I agree, and I think also during when the AI or when there is actually those this kind of life site incidents where everyone is scrambling, everyone is trying to roll back and try to just bring the system back to its normal operations. Usually, you see the tension increases between engineers, and
Yes.
each one would have his own point of view, and in that case, you may end up with a team that that is definitely in a mental state that's not necessarily always productive. So
Yeah.
sometimes reducing this stress and making sure that it can systematically recover. The AI can recover you from that state if you ever reach it, and hopefully you don't with the AI. Then definitely this creates better kind of work dynamics between different team members. Now, maybe one last question. So what is your advice in general for engineers and technical leaders when it comes to rethinking the cloud, cloud-based tools, or maybe the software life cycles in the cloud? Where should they focus their energy in general and get ready to the next wave of innovation?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think if you look at the thesis behind why move to the cloud, and why many enterprises and companies are doing that today, one of the biggest reasons is the agility that the platform gives, right? And so when you live in a world where there's constant and dynamic change, the ability for companies and developers and startups to be able to move fast is a differentiator. But the truth of the matter is, as much as it's a differentiator today, it's table stakes down the road, right? And so agility just becomes part of that. And your agility is a function of the processes and approaches that you take, right? And the underlying platform that you use is going to basically help that. And so my first advice is to always keep in mind that being part of this platform is going to allow you to be more agile. And so as you're doing that, it's so important to understand where in your process do you have bottlenecks, right? And you can really only understand that when you sort of look at it end to end. You actually capture enough data points that you can, not only sort of intuitively apply and say, hey, these are our bottlenecks based on data, but then you can actually leverage the power of machine learning to be able to look at those data sets and make those recommendations for you, right? We've seen this a lot with customers that have deployed massive amounts of VMs inside the cloud, and then they realize their costs are soaring, and it gets really challenging for them to be able to manage that. But just imagine the predictive analytics that you could do in the AI and machine learning to recommend how a customer can actually reduce and optimize their costs, right? So that's a really valuable thing. And so my guidance is keep agility in mind, understand your processes end to end, being able to capture data around that. If you do that well enough, then you can actually use machine learning to your advantage down the road to get almost orders of magnitude efficiency over the long term.
Sounds great. Well, cool. Well, thank you very much, Taimur. Really appreciate all the insights, all the inputs.
Absolutely.
It's been great chatting with you, and don't forget to have me one of those weekends where you cook something special for us.
You know what? Now I'll have to do that. We'll have to invite you over then. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thank you very much, Taimur.
All right. Thanks, Mohammed. Really appreciate that. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for watching. Appreciate your time. Wanted to share with you something quick. I'm working on an exciting new book about the use of the AI in software development and operations, which is going to come out by the end of the year. To make the book as powerful as we can, I'm interviewing industry experts to share their stories, give their experiences, and advice. If you would like your story to be included in the book, please click on the link below. You can also sign up to get regular updates and an early version of the book when it's published. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you again in a new episode of Looking Ahead. If you like what you saw, please click on like and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you sometime soon.